All right, so let's see. If you have your Bibles, you can turn in Colossians Chapter 3. That's going to be the center area that we're going to be focused on tonight. Colossians 3, and if all things go well, we might even get into Colossians 4 and kind of hopefully wrap it up. When we were together last time, we walked through Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. So let's just for a moment, because I know some of you might not have been here, let's just go back and kind of summarize, at least real quickly, what we were looking at there. The idea primarily, or the whole of Colossians, has one overarching theme. It is for Paul to press the absolute need of making Christ preeminent.
Okay.
Christ must be preeminent. Now, what he's doing with the people there in Colossae is he's actually trying to help them correct many issues and many concerns. Now think about this for a moment, because this is what Paul's trying to get them to see, is if Christ is preeminent in your life, okay, preeminent without any impediment from you, from your sin, from the distractions of the world, if Christ was literally everything for you, what would be out of place? What would be wrong in your life? So see, what Paul's trying to say is that when we see areas in our life that are out of place, that are out of kilter, things that are not quite right, we're struggling with issues and concerns, it really is like a barometer to tell us that something's not right and to begin to diagnose what that is. And always the ultimate end result of that would be Christ is not preeminent.
Right.
Christ is not preeminent. So therefore that's the place that we often need to focus. Now what we are very good at and what we do is we are really good symptom chasers.
Okay.
Oh, we love to chase symptoms, and we love to deal with the most immediate, seemingly discomforting issue of the moment, but we're not real good at being problem solvers.
Right.
So what happens to us is that we get so busy chasing symptoms, and we leave a symptom, and it's kind of like taking Tylenol when you've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
Right.
And what he's saying is if you don't have Christ right, you can fix all the symptoms you want, and you're still not going to have it right.
Yes.
And so you might be more comfortable. You might be temporarily convenient. You might have some things that kind of orient to make your life a little bit more pleasurable, but you've missed the most important. And so what he drives in that first 2 chapters is the idea of making Christ preeminent, not because he needs to be, but because he is. He is preeminent. So therefore we ought to surrender to that reality and that truth and begin now to put that into our daily lives. And then by doing so, then we can begin to answer some of the questions and challenges that we face. And so he begins to instruct them in chapter 2. He gives them some examples of where they're dealing with the issues of potentially returning back to some legalism or some other areas where they're being strained in their walk, in their relationship. And he's basically telling them, get Christ preeminent, and you'll know the answer to those questions. You won't have to struggle with them. But then he comes to chapter 3, and chapter 3 is where you might say we begin to get into more practical, real-life moments. You want to think of chapter 1 and chapter 2, it's more like the doctrinal, theological background to get us to what that needs to look like in a daily life. So if you allow me to read, I just want to read one area for a moment, and that's going to be verse 19 of chapter 3. Since we're talking to men here tonight, I want to center in on what potentially most men here already are, and even young men soon probably will be. And so let's look at this one thing that's stated: husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them.
Good.
Now, this is often referred to as kind of the household codes, or the way that we know as a believer and a follower of Jesus Christ, we would want to live out that in our family units. And that's great, but here's what sometimes I fear we do. We read something like this, and so maybe if we were honest, we would find that we're not loving our wife the way we should.
You're right.
Maybe we would find that we have been a little harsh with her, and maybe we know we need to change that tone or the way that we are dealing with her. And that's good. But now what happens is that we begin to go, all right, I'm going to be a better husband, and I am going to now work within my strength and within my ability to be a better loving husband. Or I'm going to restrain my language, or I'm going to restrain my voice, and I'm going to try to speak in a very temperamental way so that I will not be harsh with her. Now, what we're doing there, we don't even realize, is now we're chasing a symptom and not the actual issue. Let me ask you this. If Christ was preeminent in your life, without any impediment of your sin, or the issues or the struggles that you allow to detract from that, would you have any trouble or problem loving your wife and not being harsh with her? Do you see what happens there? If you get the first thing first, everything else begins to fall into place. If you work hard at being a better husband, guess what? You may end up being a better husband and yet still miss Jesus. And if you miss Jesus, you really did just miss everything.
Right.
So what we see there is that's what he's beginning to tell us. Now let's look at a broader picture here and think for a moment. He says right there in verse 18, he says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. Slaves, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters." Allow me to skip over to verse 1 of chapter 4. Speaking of masters, treat your slaves justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. Now think for a moment, why would Paul need to tell wives to submit? Why would he need to tell husbands to love? Why would he need to tell children to obey? Why would he need to tell fathers to not provoke? Why would he need to tell slaves to obey and masters to be just? Because those things are against our natural inclinations.
Right.
So he's saying, if you are a follower of Christ, these things would be pictures of who you are in these relationships. So if those things are not pictures of who we are in those relationships, it begins to tell us something. That maybe we're not the follower of Christ we thought we were.
Yeah.
And if we put our efforts into being those things without following Christ, we've missed it. That's not what Paul's telling us to do. In chapter 2, he's already talked about the legalism and the essence of how you would try to follow more laws or rules and how that can be distracting. Because if you love Christ, you don't need rules to follow, because if you're following Him, the rules are taken care of. So he's helping us see now on the backside that if we have these issues, and let's just be honest, the reason he tells us is because we struggle. Guys, I pray and hope that you love your wives to the best of your ability, but can I tell you it's insufficient? Because the measurement that Paul uses in Ephesians 5 is what? For you to love your wives as Christ loves the church. And I'm telling you, there's not a man walking that does that.
Right.
So if that is the bar, none of us do that. So therefore, what that tells us is there's always a place and a way that we know we must increase. We must become better at. We must challenge ourselves. We must fall in love with Jesus more so that we will love our wives even more.
Yes.
So he's trying to help us note something here. So when we think of that, husbands, love your wives, do not be harsh with them, he's reminding us that our natural inclination as men is not to love. It's not. We know it. Whether we want to admit it, whether we want to say it out loud, it's not to love. It's actually to use and abuse. That's man's nature without God, is to use and abuse, not love.
Yeah.
A wife's nature without God is not to submit, but to nag and overrule a husband. The natural inclination of a child is to disobey, not obey. I can remember with all of my children, we had 8. I never had to teach one how to disobey.
Right.
Do you realize what we're saying there? That means you've had to be taught how to love. And we still have to be taught how to love. So all of that's important as we're going to now move back up to the very beginning of chapter 1, of verse 1 in chapter 3, to begin to look at this question or this way that he's posing this. And that's a check place for us. If we know, if you can honestly say, and I hope you would be honest enough to say that you are not loving your wife at the level that Christ loves the church, that means there's room for improvement. Well, then when we look at verse 1, he begins to add this qualifier. Now, he's already stated, again, remember the doctrine and the theology that we need to follow. Make Christ preeminent. He's saying, now, if Christ is preeminent, these things would follow. If Christ is preeminent, these things become a part of who you are. And he says, now, if then you have been raised with Christ, that means if you have identified or said, I am a follower of Jesus Christ, if you make the claim that you have had that experience of saving grace in your life, whether that was many, many years ago or just recently, if you have made that statement that now I am one of His, then these things are what should follow. And he gives us 3 right up front. 3 imperatives. He says, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. So he tells us to seek. He now says, set your minds on the things that are above, not on the things that are on earth. He tells us to set our minds, or set. And he says, for you have died, your life is hidden with Christ in God. He tells us to hide. Seek, set, hide. Now, those 3 things he's using as identifiers for us. Now, as we look at this, here's the thing. If we begin to walk through this and we see that we're not seeking Christ very well, or maybe not at all, if we're not setting our mind upon Him very often, or maybe not at all, and if we have not hidden ourselves, or another way to say that is finding our identity in Him, then you have to go back to the qualifier.
Yes.
Because he says, if you have been raised with Christ, these things should be. If these things are not, then potentially the problem is not to work harder, try harder, go to church more, read the Bible more, which those things may be good, but that is not where the issue is. The issue is potentially you have been religious and you have not been raised with Christ.
Right.
Guys, I just want to tell you, as I've gone around and I've done men's ministry in a variety of venues and a variety of churches, and I'm telling you that guys sitting in men's ministry, there's many a man who is religious but does not know Christ.
Wow.
There's many a man who would check boxes and say, yes, I read my Bible. Yes, I go to Sunday church. Yes, I serve somehow, some way. And yet at the end of the day, they've never been raised with Christ because they don't have a heart and a passion for Him.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you've seen those guys who now can acknowledge that, begin to get that heart and passion, because guess what? Now, serving Him is no longer a burden. Going to church is not about checking a box.
Right. Reading
the Bible is not something you do out of duty. It's out of the overflow of the love for the one who has now raised you.
Yes.
So let's go back for a moment and let's just look at this. He says to seek the things that are above. So another way to just encapsulate that is to seek Christ, okay? So to seek Christ. So let me ask you this. Are you seeking Christ? And if you are, what in your mind are the ways that you are doing that? And is it sufficient? Are you finding Him? Because see, if you're seeking Him, you would be finding Him. And if you're not finding Him, then what that really can tell you is that maybe you're not seeking Him as much as you think. I mean, we're right in the middle or the beginning of hunting season. The rut's on. You're seeing these bucks go all over the place. Here just in Lumberton, back behind Walmart, my son called me the other day, and a huge buck was running up and down that road between Walmart and going over to 96. And it was blocking traffic, and everybody had to stop because they didn't know if he was going to jump on the car or what he was going to do. And I'm telling you, guys are like that about the deer sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with that. But now let me ask you this. If you're a hunter, or if you're a fisherman, or you love college sports or football, if your passion for Christ was put next to that,
Okay.
would that passion level go up or down? Would the passion for Christ raise because actually your passion for hunting is higher than your passion for Christ? Or would your passion for Christ be so high that it would raise the bar on anything else that you would say you're passionate about? Can I tell you that most men that I interact with and I talk with and I visit with, sports outweighs Jesus.
Right.
Chasing a fish outweighs Jesus. I've seen men who will go out in the freezing cold rain, like what's happening right now tonight. They'll be there early in the morning on that lake, driving across that lake because this is the weather. They know if they go deep with that jig, they can catch finally that 10-pound bass they've been after.
Wow.
But give them 2 sprinkles and, hey, I can't make it to church.
Right.
I mean, it's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
We know it. Let me put it this way. Let me put it another way. And I was a fanatical duck hunter for years and years and years. My brother can testify to that. But I had to make a deal right up front between myself and God. Nothing I did on Saturday would ever interfere with Sunday.
Okay.
And if I couldn't duck hunt on Sunday and still get to church, on Saturday and still get to church and serve and do the things like I needed to do with the heart and passion I needed to do on Sunday, then Saturday had to go.
Right.
And I'm telling you guys, we got to work at that because
Yeah.
we don't naturally just seek after Him, mainly because, let's just go back and be honest with what we started off with, He's not that preeminent in our life.
Yeah.
He's like the sidecar you stick on a motorcycle. He's something that just doesn't really belong there for us most of the time, and we would prefer if He wasn't because He slows us down. I mean, we use Jesus as something to go to when we need Him. We use Jesus as something to get our wife off our back. We use Jesus as a way to look good in a community of people. But we don't use Jesus the way He was asked to be used. Preeminent.
Yeah.
So what about your seeking? Are you seeking Him with a passion? Just the other day, when we're actually in the middle of moving, and so I had an appointment, and I got a pattern, probably like a lot of guys, everything in my pockets, it goes in a particular spot, and that way in the morning when I get up, I know where my wallet is, I know where my keys are, I know where my spare change is, I know it's all right there in that one spot. Well, in moving, my spot has got moved because I don't even have a spot established, right? So I get up and I'm going to my appointment, I'm dressed, I'm ready to go out the door, and I go, oh wait, I got to go get my wallet and stuff, and I find my wallet sitting over here, and I go, okay, that's fine, and then I'm going, what did I do with the keys? And there's boxes and things like that scattered around, and needless to say, my keys weren't where I thought they were. So now I'm having to stop
Right.
and think, now where did I put those keys? Okay, last night we were doing this and that. I had the keys in my pocket. What I've done, and I go, well, hey, I've got an appointment, but really it doesn't matter. So I just start lackadaisically walking around, going, I don't see my keys. Walk back in the bedroom. I don't see my keys. And that's not the case, is it? What was I doing? I was going everywhere I thought the keys might be. I was pulling back the covers of the bed. I went to the refrigerator because I remembered I did get something to drink last night. Thought maybe I stuck it in there. I'm looking in boxes, even though those boxes have been taped shut. I'm just in case, so that I can eventually find out I had set them right there when I came in the door and they were on the corner. And then I hop in the car and I get. Let me ask you, are you that passionate about seeking Christ? Or are you just lackadaisical? I don't see Him over here. I don't. I'll find him in a little while. Remember when you were kids playing hide and seek? My brother and I used to do that. You know what? He could never find me. You know why? Because he never came looking for me. He was cruel that way. He'd send me hiding, and he'd go in and watch TV for 2 hours. I thought I was a great hider. Can I tell you that we're doing Jesus that way? We're saying we're seeking him, but we're actually not even bothering going to look. And now we wonder why he's not really doing anything in our life, and our life is really the same old, and we're not changed, and nothing about us has changed. So to seek means, again, to do it with a passion.
Yes.
To set our minds upon Christ is likewise. It means to set your mind on something is to take something else and put it out. I mean, guys, we're kind of geared toward being one thing at a time. You know, our wives, you know how they do that? They can talk about 26 things at once. They can pick up a conversation they had with you 15 years ago and now start adding something else to it. They can remember everything you've ever said, and they use that against you, right? Just like in a court of law. Guys, we're kind of like we're single-minded. That's kind of what God gifted us for. That way, when we get on a task, we stay at a task. So for us, even more so, we have to choose what we're going to set our mind on.
Right. Yes.
This is why, if my wife is talking to me when I'm watching a football game, and I tell her, honey, I'm listening, what it means is my ears are available to receive sound, but my mind is not processing.
That's right. That's right.
To set your mind means no, everything else stops. Everything else has to be set aside. You know, when we talk about ideally, you know, devotions or quiet time or those moments of where we can pray, ideally that's what we're really trying to encourage within people. But can I tell you that I struggle with that? Because what I find is that when I sit down with my Bible and I've got my cup of coffee and I open it up and I take my first sip of coffee and I read my first verse, all of a sudden I go, oh, you know what? I better go check that real quick. And then I come back and I sit down and I get the reading and I'm going, oh yeah, you know, I got to pay that bill. I need to remember that. Oh yeah, and then I need to go by that place on the way in. And before long, I've had a 30-minute devotion that really had about 30 seconds of Jesus in it, if I'm lucky.
Right.
And we know that's not setting your mind on him, is it? It's like what maybe you did back in the days when you were in school. I'm still in school, so I'm struggling with some of that right now. And I know what it means, and my wife understands it, and my family understands it. There are times where I have to say everything else stops. The world can keep on going on around me. However, I'm about to get locked up in this room, and I'm about to be there for whatever amount of days and hours and time is necessary to produce the paper or to study for whatever I'm about to be tested on. Yep. And what that means is I have decided nothing else is more important than what is in front of me right now because it matters. Yep. Is Jesus that for you?
That's good.
Are you willing to take other areas of your life and say, nothing else is more important? Are you willing to allow your pastor, with the pressing of the Holy Spirit, to go past 12 o'clock and make you late to something that you thought was most important, maybe a meal or a ball game? Are you willing to stop something in your life and say, you know what, as much as I wanted to do that, and that is good, best is me spending time with him.
Yes.
Or focusing on him. See, that's setting our mind upon him. That's taking other things and having to relegate them to what they are, lesser. That's what makes something preeminent, is that they raise above everything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's what, in your relationship with your wife better be preeminent over any other woman.
Yes.
If you can do that, at least with a struggle and hopefully well enough to keep your marriage going strong, can you do that with Jesus? Because we know he says much in the same way with the totality of Scripture, what? That we shouldn't have any other gods before him.
Right.
And anything that, guess what, we put in front of him, whether it is a bass boat, whether it is a career, whether it is making money, whether it is other things that we could label as good, guess what? That becomes a god, and we make him something lesser so that we can make it something greater.
Right.
Setting your mind on him is choosing to make him preeminent, regardless of the cost. So now to set our minds upon him, to seek him and set our minds, and then to find our identity or to hide ourselves in Christ. You know, every man, I believe, has this, because I've yet to have a man counter and tell me not. Every man has a voice in their head.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an uplifting voice. It's not a positive voice. It's a voice that's been put there over a series of years and experiences, and it can be something someone said many, many years ago. It can be some events that took place, and eventually whatever voice or way that came to be, that voice begins to take on your voice. And it begins to tell you who you are. And it begins to tell you you don't matter. It begins to tell you that you're not good enough. It begins to tell you you're a failure. It begins to tell you you'll never measure up. That's mine. That's the voice I've had to wrestle with for years and finally work and turn over to God, that I don't measure up. And as I wrestled with that and I began to look, I had to begin to realize, that goes back to some things that were said to me when I was in grade school by a teacher, some things that happened to me early in life, a way that my father interacted with me, and some of those things that began to put that voice in me. And you know what? I spent many years of my life trying to prove that voice wrong instead of saying that voice had no right to speak. And the moment that I surrendered to Jesus Christ is doing this for us. He's telling us the voice in your head and what other people said no longer matter. The only voice that matters is what I say.
Right.
And I say, you're worth it. You're worth my sacrifice. I say, you'll measure up because I measured up and I'm giving you what I have. To find our identity in him means that now we no longer listen to our own voice. We no longer listen to other voices. We no longer are caught up with people pleasing. We're no longer trying to prove ourselves. We don't have anything to prove. All we have to do is make Christ preeminent and love him with all our heart and follow him faithfully. So see, the question then becomes, where are you finding your identity? Mm-hmm. Because see, a lot of men find it in what they can accomplish. A lot of men will define it by, again, using their family as a way to highlight that they've done something of value. A lot of times men will point to their bank accounts and say, look at my success. A lot of times men will demonstrate their manliness by being able to kill a big buck or catch a big fish. Or is it what Jesus says that matters? So now Paul's telling us something here. He says, if you have been raised with Christ, what it means is now you will seek me with passion. If you have been raised with Christ, now you will purposefully and intentionally set your mind upon me. And if you have been raised with Christ, you will no longer allow anyone, even yourself, to tell you who you are. You're mine, and I will tell you, and you will follow. See, guys, when we begin to do that, that lets us know we've been raised with Christ. It lets us know that we are doing the work of making him preeminent. And here's the beauty. He has promised that one day it will be done in totality. Oh, it won't happen completely here. We can grow in it every day, making him more preeminent, being a better follower, being a more faithful and obedient servant. We can do it every day. But ultimately, he says, there's coming a day when you will stand before me and everything I promised, all the sin in your life and its effects upon you, your ability to think and process, those natural inclinations you had to fight, all of those are going to be wiped away. And you're finally going to see me fully for who I am, and you're finally going to be able to experience the beauty and joy of that without you getting in the way of it. Guys, He's worth it. He's preeminent. We don't make Him preeminent for any other reason, because He is. And when we do, it begins to transform and change everything about us. Let me bless our food and our time together, and then, like I said, as we get done a little bit later, we'll dive into the latter part of chapter 3, and maybe we'll even hint at 4, but like I said, we'll go as God leads here. Let's pray. Lord, again, I thank you for these men and their willingness to be here tonight. I thank you for the joy of being able to come and share your word with them. Lord, I pray that you, again, challenge every single one of us. Don't let any of us slip away. Lord, every single man here, as we've already stated, knows we need to be able to follow you better. We need to be able to be more faithful. We need to make you more preeminent. So, Lord, help us begin to see and know what those things in us that are impeding that are, so that we can begin to allow you to do the transforming work that is needed. And Lord, I just pray that you, again, be faithful, as you have said that your word will not return void. But Lord, let it return without a void, but yet in a positive change. So, Lord, I'm just asking tonight, be your night. Let us be your people. And then bless this food, bless this time together, bless this fellowship. Thank you for those who have diligently worked to prepare all of the food, and allow us to have a great evening together for your glory. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.